What's up, everybody? Today we're doing Boston's first album, which came out in August 25th, 1976 by Epic Records. This one has most of their, if not all of their big hits. Like More Than a Feeling, Peace of Mind, Long Time, Rock and Roll Band, Smokin', Let Me Take You Home Tonight. Nobody knows Hitch a Ride. And nobody knows something. So 6 out of the 8 songs. This is going to be a lot shorter probably than the Coheed one because we didn't even do half of that album. There's 8 songs. Let's get started. First song, More Than a Feeling, which everybody knows, and it's such a fucking rock anthem. It's so good.
And this is big time. I mean, Boston, they just started right out of the gate with this song on this album. Just kind of really showing who they are and what they're going to be about. Anything that you can think of Boston-wise is going to be on this particular song.
It's going to be, I mean, this, like I said, this whole album is like, I know it's much older than me, but I grew up listening to this shit. Like, I was probably the first time I listened to them, I was probably like 9.
Oh, yeah. It was always on, like, even back then on classic rock radio back in the early 90s and whatnot, all the way up until now. It's just a staple on any classic rock radio station you're going to listen to.
Yeah, any kind of mix station or anything like that. Yeah, this song is going to come up at least once.
And it's just one of those songs, too, where on first listen, it doesn't really sound that difficult, and it just seems like just a traditional 70s pop rock song, but there's a lot of complexity to this and the album as a whole. I would say probably the biggest thing about this is the production quality.
Yeah, their production quality was amazing for 1976. Like, I don't remember if I brought it up last time, but it holds up today. Like, it's really clear. You can hear everything. And a lot of it is like, there wasn't a lot of bass tone in a lot of production back then that there is now, and it makes it sound a lot more sharper, a lot more clear. And I want to look into what their producer used or did to get such a good sound, 'cause especially back then when everything was recorded to tape, and I assume it was probably live recording.
Oh yeah, because they recorded everything to tape back then. I mean, this is long before Pro Tools, long before any kind of computer-based editing software. And if I remember right from reading, because I did read a little bit about this band before the video, Tom Schultz did all the engineering and producing in his basement for this, so I mean that's even more incredible to think.
That's pretty impressive.
And for that matter too, after reading about this particular album, Tom Schultz recorded pretty much every instrument except for vocals and drums, and even then, if I remember right, there was 2 tracks in particular he didn't do bass on, but everything else, and you can kind of hear that throughout this album because there's a lot of like very similar sounding bass lines going on.
Yep.
And that's the only thing I wanted to mention too about the guitar work on this album is, yes, he uses the same motifs over and over again throughout the album, but it's so effective.
Yeah, and especially back then when everything was still new and everything hadn't been done over and over and over and over and over again, you could get away with doing it over and over and over again on the same album.
Yeah.
So they did that a lot. And then the other thing I was going to say too is the sound of the guitar. Like, he has such a thick sound. He used Strats?
No, actually,
he used Les Pauls?
I do believe he used Les Pauls for the most part.
Which even then, for back in the 70s, what they used to do, because it had such a thick tone, and they couldn't like record it well, a lot of times what they did was they would cut the lows out.
Yep.
And that's why, like, you get that. They did it with Rush. You could hear it in like 2112 or any other stuff, how his guitar just sounds really scratchy. We bring up Rush a lot, I was just thinking.
Yeah.
But his guitar sounds really scratchy, where in this album, I don't know how he did it, but it just has such a nice, full, thick sound.
Because correct me if I'm wrong, but that would be like if you push the mids a little bit more, like it just kind of really gets that frequency going a little more, and then if there's a little bit of high end on it with it, but then if you drop the low end, it gets that really nice cutting tone to it without sacrificing the clarity. And I think it's awesome too. I don't know if it's done that much modernly or not, but he double tracks with regular acoustic 6-string, acoustic 12-string, and then he would throw in the that style of electric guitar along with it, and it just gives it that really big wall of sound tone that he gets.
And I don't know who started that, but like that's something that's done by mostly everybody these days. Everybody double tracks everything, probably except drums.
And then that too, I was kind of a little bit more so than last video. I was looking a little bit more into this group and whatnot, and what I kind of been seeing an awful lot is when they talk about Tom Scholz's style and everything.
Another
like
classic
that.
Peace of Mind.
I love this song. Like, it just comes right in, and it's keeps the same sort of vibe going that was on. That's what's kind of cool about these two songs in a row. The kind of vibe that you ended with on the first song kind of continues on into this song.
Yeah, and like we said before, it could be contributed to the fact that like they use a lot of the same guitar techniques, and yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of repeating, which it's not a bad thing, especially like back then. Like I said, like everything hadn't been overdone and beaten to death, and so like, and what I really like about it is this whole album it just feels so upbeat.
Yeah.
And it's quite a departure from our last one that we did, where that was like, it sounded upbeat, but it was really dark.
Yeah, this one's upbeat.
It's just upbeat. Happy. The lyrics are happy, and it makes you feel good to listen to it. It's a good change of pace from, especially from what I'm used to listening to, like, and you know, all those death metal bands I listen to. I like listening to stuff like this to, you know, see where the bands that I listen to now got their influence.
It's one of the techniques that Tom Scholz kind of introduced on this album that the 80s guitarists kind of adopted was the pick scrape. Some will call them a pick slide or a pick drag.
Oh, but he did the shit out of that too.
Yeah, but it's awesome. Another thing that he'll do too is he'll do like a really big bend on a note, and like kind of bend it up in pitch, and then so you kind of get that little sort of effect.
Yeah.
But just throwing in those little small details like that, it really makes the difference on a lot of these songs. And, you know, everybody anticipates it because they know the song, you know.
What are songs that aren't on this album? Because I'm trying to think of a Boston song that's not on this album that was, like, really popular. And I mean, there's probably a couple, but...
Yeah, I mean, the only ones I can think of were some of the second album, Don't Look Back and Feeling Satisfied.
But again, they sound the same. Like, for me, if you listen to this album, you've listened to Boston. Yeah. Because... everything else is either it sounds the same or they just did it again, and this is, you know, their quintessential album. Yeah. It's such a classic. It's so good. It's just, this is to me the definition of classic rock. Yes. It's just fun, and it's got some balls. This one's epic. This is Foreplay in Long Time. This is their epic jam track.
I mean, it's just amazing too with the keyboard. I mean, it's one of those things where it's such an overlooked instrument in rock music, and, you know, in this era of rock and roll, you had to have it. I mean, because it filled out the sound. So
this was when we used to play Rock Band with our friends when we were kids, or not even kids, we were probably teenagers, or I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And we used to call it the smoke break song.
Yeah.
Because there's that like keyboard break in the middle, and there's just nothing going on.
Yeah. And see, what gets me too, because when this song kicks in, like the second half of the song, I don't know what guitar he's using, but when he does the whammy bar scoops, that's kind of a Tom Scholz thing too, like with his kind of really melodic leads. And since everything's dropped down so far, I really don't call him solos in this, because like everything else is just dropped down, and he's doing a nice melody line. And but the harmonies, I mean, you cannot talk about Boston without talking about guitar harmonies.
Their guitar harmonies are they're up there. They're some of the best. A lot of the metalcore stuff that I listen to, like, it's like what do they call it, the 5-7-8 progression is like the metalcore thing, but then there was always that third harmony over it where it was 3-5-7.
And this, it's so well produced and so well recorded, it just sounds like one note, and it's tough to pick it out.
This was just such back in the day, man. Everything was just smoke pot, bang chicks, and that was the 70s.
And it was also
have a good time. That was like the theme of music back then.
Right. And I know it got even more so the case in the 80s, you know, the whole Guitar Hero thing and everything, but I mean, you were the shit if you were a guitar player back in the 70s. Yeah. I mean, everybody looked up to you.
I don't know. I don't think the Guitar Hero era is over.
No.
I think it's changed.
Yeah, I mean, it means different to be, I mean, you have to be a machine on the guitar now. See, back in the day, as long as you did something kind of a little bit more innovative, then you were known. But now you have to be, like, top tier, highest level guitar player in order to be
super technical, and you can thank John Petrucci for that.
Yeah, and I do believe this is the longest song on this album.
It's got to be
sitting at about 8 minutes.
Almost 8 minutes. So I think all the rest of the songs are like 3 or 4 minutes long.
And that's the thing too. That's the one criticism I will give this album is it did fall victim to the whole you got to have a under 4 minute song to get on the radio. Well, I mean, take a look at all their hits. Every single one of them was.
I agree.
Falls within that range. And I think it also falls victim to that song could have been longer. Like you listen to a song, it's got a really good groove to it, and it's like, man, I wish it didn't end there.
It was really effective though, because I think that's kind of what makes music like this a little bit more attainable or relevant today, because like I said before, people have kind of short attention spans now.
Yeah.
So having a 3 minute long song, especially one that catchy and poppy, I hate to say it, but it's kind of poppy.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's
people are going
to
kind of gravitate towards it. Rock and Roll Band.
Yeah, this is a great song.
This was one of the songs where I remember driving around when I was probably still in middle school, and I remember you had that Saturn.
Oh yeah.
And I remember Paul cut your radio out.
Oh yeah.
So I remember for a while you were driving around with a boombox and you had made mix CDs, and this was on there. And oh man, I would love to find that first CD that you made.
Oh yeah.
Because this was on there. There was Blue Oyster Cult on there.
Oh yeah. Some Judas Priest.
That was a really good mix.
We had some good ones.
But I remember this song, and we used to just belt it, man. Yeah. Like I remember driving around the summer in that Saturn, man, and just me being probably 13 years old, just belting out Boston Rock and Roll Band.
And at that time too, that's kind of weird when you think about it, because this had to have been 2005,
yeah.
So I mean,
so I was probably like 14, but probably early high school for me.
So I mean, you have like this heavy music going on, and I think the climate at the time, System of a Down was kind of big. Avenged Sevenfold was getting kind of big.
Yeah.
And then here you have a bunch of kids driving around a car listening to Rock and Roll Band by Boston. So I mean, that's just it's interesting, and to me it's a little weird, but that's just tells you how endearing this music is.
It was a good summer, and like it's kind of cool because like I always say, like this stuff came out at a time like way before my time, and like I couldn't relate to a lot of it just because it's not my time. But when you're a teenager listening to this, even 30 years later or whatever it was, when I was a kid, and just driving around with your brothers in the summer, and you feel nostalgic, like
you sure do.
It's kind of cool. I could kind of feel like how like my mom or my dad would have felt listening to the same stuff when it came out back then.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Like that's what this album kind of feels like to me, is summertime music.
Yeah,
it's just something you put on because you want to feel good because it's nice outside and everything like that.
Yeah, and it really is. You can't help but smile listening to this music, and just and those high vocals, and they're so silly. Especially now. They're so good, though.
They are. I mean, and what can you say about Brad Delp? I mean, he's got that really big, full voice, even at those high ranges like that.
Yeah.
I mean, he can do... we missed it a little bit ago on the first song, More Than a Feeling, but he can do a lot of amazing acrobatics with his voice. He can do falsettos and immediately go into full voice. He can quiet it down.
He's the master of those vocal harmonies, too. I don't know who's harmonizing with him. I imagine in the studio,
I think it's him.
Probably him, but live, God, man, his harmonies are so good.
Yeah. I mean, it's just incredible. And then same thing on More Than a Feeling earlier. There's a point where he's harmonizing with the guitar, playing on the high end of the range of the guitar.
Yeah, this was another one smoking. I think this might have been on like your second mix or something. We made a lot of mix CDs back then.
And there was a lot. I mean, I would put a lot of the same bands on, but...
Oh, it's just, I love that blues rock. Or like that swing rock.
It's just cool. I mean, when you hear the rest of the songs in this album, I mean, there is, despite the fact that they're playing more or less the same riffs throughout the entire album and everything, there is still some variety. And it's mostly in the feel of the song, not so much in what's being played. It's more of the feel. And because you got your ballads on here, you got your hard rock. So I mean, and then what's nice about this, and then Rock and Roll Band, is it's just like that straightforward rock and roll. It's cool. Like I don't know,
it's cool. You don't hear a lot of stuff like that anymore. And again, like I wasn't around in the '70s. Clearly, but it makes you feel like you were.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll be honest, I mean, because I'm a little older, so I did grow up in the 90s, and you know, it was kind of the same climate, at least from what I would hear from people that were from the 70s, you know.
Yeah.
It seemed like it was a similar climate. You know, we had the grunge music thing going on, we had pop punk going on, so you kind of had the same sort of feel. It was a little different, but, you know, it was a good time to be a kid. And the nice thing, too, is you had this kind of music along with the grunge and whatnot to listen to. So
yeah, and around the time that I was getting into this was when, you know, more music like what I listen to now was just coming out. So it was interesting to me to like listen to this and like Avenged Sevenfold and Bullet for My Valentine, and like you can kind of way different music, but you can kind of hear like how Boston may have influenced bands like that.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially with like the guitar harmonies and
well, even a few of his licks. I mean, because he does. I mean, everybody talks about the Kirk Hammett lick where he just goes down the those three notes and whatever. We heard that a little earlier on this album, and it's Kirk Hammett ripped it right from it. It's just diddle 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 diddle.
Oh, and I guess like the structure was pretty similar too, like how it's just that, you know, verse chorus bridge verse chorus kind of thing, and then but it was kind of cool to, you know, because I don't think music, at least rock music, has changed much since about 2010, I would say, and it was interesting to have pretty much every music available to you at the time as far as rock and metal goes. When I was growing up, I had so much music coming into to me that, man, like it was just like a flood all at once, and like that's why I haven't really, like, I spent a lot of time listening to this stuff when I was younger, and then just forgot about it because there was so much shit that came in at the same time for me.
Yeah, I mean, this song, like, you probably see me kind of bopping around here and everything. You can't help but get into it, man. You
can't help it. It's so good, and it just makes you feel good. Like this, it's a nice change of pace. It really is.
Yeah. But yeah, it's well, kind of like what he was just saying too. You know, everybody falls into a certain style of music you want to listen to for a period of time, and you know, that's why I was really excited to start this project, because it kind of allows me to go outside the box a little bit. But what was really interesting to me was, since we did yeah, that was nuts. Like, he just kind of hit right during that pause.
Oh man.
But especially after doing the Coheed album, it was really interesting to do an album I wasn't so familiar with, and then come back and do one that I am familiar with.
Yeah.
And in a different perspective, though. And like, it's, oh man, I love this song.
Yeah, this is one that nobody knows.
Yeah, I mean, the next two songs, this one and Something About You, I really like both songs, but they would never. This one I think did hit radio back in the day, but it wasn't a hit like the others were.
Yeah, I've never heard this song. And
Something About You, yeah, same thing. I think that got even less radio play, and I think Something About You is the best song on the album. But
yeah, I listened to a little bit. I listened to like probably 30 seconds of it.
Yeah,
it's that song has such a different feel from the whole album.
Yeah,
this kind of has a Beatles thing to it.
Yeah, and that's what I was just about to say. Like, it is a little different, but it's familiar enough in this album to where it kind of fits. But at the same time, like you said, it's got like a late 60s kind of feel to it, as opposed to like a mid 70s feel.
Yeah. This just makes me think like it would be cool to see these guys like playing in some huge arena, because you know that's what they were good for.
Yeah.
And like, man, I'm just lighting the crowd up. I bet it was awesome.
And it was so weird too, because like when I was reading about this group, there was some circumstances with other groups where it's like, man, I didn't know they were making albums this whole time and everything like that. Boston, they have made, I think they're working on their 7th album right now. So yeah, I mean, they released 6 albums prior, and the last one came out, I want to say in 2015, 2016. But yeah, over the course of almost 50 years,
they've only come out with 7 albums. That's crazy. So did they take a break for a long time?
I don't know what it is. Well, I think it's because Tom Schultz is a huge perfectionist in the studio.
Yeah.
And I know that was the case between their second and third albums. He wanted to get it perfect.
Yeah.
So it took between 78 and 86 to make Don't Look Back and Third Stage.
See, and I'll bet I've never even heard anything off of any of those, because like I said, everything's on this album. Like the other 2 songs that everybody knows are on their second album.
Yeah, because the third album, I've heard a couple off of it, and I'll admit, I mean, by the time you get through this album and Don't Look Back, you've kind of had enough, you know what I mean? Yeah. And then the Third Stage is a continuation of the same thing. That
was just like I was saying earlier, like, you can listen to this album and be like, okay, that's Boston. And
exactly.
You never, honestly, like, unless this is what you're about, you never really have to listen to any more.
Right.
You just be like, I've heard them, I've experienced them, and that's it. But like I just said, I haven't listened to everything they have, but I didn't even know they were still around.
And
that's really interesting.
And I'll tell you too, that's where I was going with that. Is I think that's kind of part of the reason they were so hit and miss with when they're going to come out with an album, is because they realize that, I'm sure, and they're like, okay, well, everybody's heard this already, so we're just going to come out of our hole that we're in and just, here's an album for you, and then 10 years later make another one. So I'm thinking I think that was a business decision on his part. I don't think it was so much that it was something that hindered or anything like that. I think he just said, we're just going to make an album every so often just to remind people we're here.
And I'm sure they made their money off this album who knows how many times over.
Well, this was one of the few where it went, reading about it, it went platinum almost immediately after it came out. I mean, it was insane.
And I can see why. This album's really good. And I mean, what else was there? Like I said, 2112 had come out, which that was their first album that people just really loved. Yeah. And that's the album that saved their career. Yeah. And then you had like Kiss Destroyer, which again, that was another album that is just such a classic with like Detroit Rock City and stuff like that on it. Yeah. And then you had Boston. You had this album, which was so much different than at least those two. Yeah. Yeah, I can see why it went platinum.
I think it went platinum.
How quick?
I want to say it was don't quote me on this, but I want to say it was within a couple of months of it coming out. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was fast. And then it hit...
Let's see what it says on here.
I don't know if it hit Diamond, but I know whatever's next after that, that was in 1990. So it took a little while after. But yeah, here we go. Now we're talking.
Yeah,
Something About You. One of the few Boston songs where it actually begins in a minor key. I think it's one of the few Boston songs that has a minor key at all.
Yeah, this doesn't say about when it went platinum.
Because I remember reading about it, and it was like immediately it went gold, and then it went platinum not long after.
Their guitar harmonies, they're all so good. That's all the same key. It's really good. I like that, it's like a slide into that second note.
He likes to slide. He likes to follow the scale. One of the cool things that I noticed he does is he'll incorporate a fifth right at the end of a phrase. So he'll end his phrase and then da da da. Mm-hmm. It's really cool. I don't know. He was just smart with what he did. The one thing I wish that he would have done a little bit of that is modern is use octave chords here and there, because it just adds a certain something. You can almost hear some influence of these guys, especially from their contemporaries like Van Halen or some of those other ones like that. I mean, Van Halen had his own thing, his own signature with the fretboard tapping and everything. But I think he was one of them, too, that took the pick scrape concept and made it his own. A lot of those 80s shredders, I mean, that's just a given. You hear it, they got it from Tom Scholz. Yeah. And I don't think you heard... I think you heard it, but you didn't hear it nearly as much until he did it.
Yeah.
I don't know, this song I think was probably the most complete song on this record. It's got everything in it. More Than a Feeling and this song. I think if you want to hear what Boston has to offer, just listen to these two songs on this album, and you got pretty much what Boston's about. And I love how Brad Delp just goes crazy on these vocals. He really lets loose and just lets the emotion drive what he's singing and how he's doing it here. I don't know. And that's something I really think you can only get on analog equipment. You'd be too tempted to take a auto-tuner or, adjust the dynamics on it with software now. Yeah. I think you'd be too tempted to do that. Whereas back then, you're recording an analog, it costs a ton of money to undo that.
Oh, I didn't know this song was on this album. This is another one that doesn't sound anything like this whole record.
Yeah, and I think this is the final track, isn't it? Let Me Take You Home Tonight.
I was gonna say too, the guitar tone reminds me a lot of Queen.
Yeah.
But they were around the same time, right?
Yeah, they were right around the same time. I want to say Queen, their debut had to have been in the early 70s, 70, 71. But it didn't matter because
for a debut album, these guys had a much better sound, I think.
I agree.
At least on the record. I'm not saying their overall sound, but their production quality was so good. And I didn't know that every single song was on this album. Yeah. The production quality is so good. This sounds like something that would have came out for their third or fourth album.
I agree. But that's the thing too, is in reading about this as well, Tom Schultz did. He argued with the record company execs, and he said, "No, I want to make this myself." And they were shady about some of this stuff too, man. They were trying to like send in copies of stuff, and then they got some bogus thing in or whatever, and then this is what he submitted to the record company, and they left him alone after that and said, "All right, you can go ahead and produce."
Yeah.
So just to think that one man is capable of doing all of this, except for the singing and the drumming, of course, it's just incredible.
It's really interesting, like bands like this that they're just kind of outdated, but they're not at the same time. Like I feel like they're still relevant, at least to some extent.
Yeah. When I say not even just relevant, I would say like I don't think you have modern music without bands like this.
No, absolutely not.
It's incredible to me to think that in 2 years this album is going to be 50 years old.
Wow.
And to think that
crazy.
At this point we're listening to music that's 50 years old. Now, if you can imagine when this album was brand new, music that was 50 years old came out in 1926.
Right. Yeah.
So look at the difference there. And of course they were listening to that in 76.
I mean, when did like Robert Johnson come out? That was like in the 20s, wasn't it?
Yeah, like in the early 20s.
And I mean, I'm not saying like he was really influential too 50 years later to like Clapton, and because Crossroads.
Yeah, I agree.
He wrote that song.
And I just think it's incredible that stuff 50 years old now, it sounds like, especially this album, it sounds like it could have come out yesterday.
And people still listen to it, and it kind of proves that music is timeless.
Yeah.
Or it can be. I mean, I think stuff that comes out now sounds a lot more dated, or sounds potentially more dated than stuff like this, because it just has such a timeless sound to it.
Yeah.
And like I said, you can just pop this on and summer day drive around and you just feel great. Like that's what this music was so good for. And
then I'll say too, like there's other bands from the 70s, like I'll mention Steely Dan and stuff like that. That does sound pretty dated. I mean, you listen to it and you're like, this came out in the 70s. Like,
and I think most of that is because of the production quality.
Exactly. The production quality, the style, because it's like that sort of jazz rock sort of stuff. Yeah. Whereas these guys, they knew what they were doing. We're doing rock and roll. And I don't know if they were the first, but I think they were the first big arena rock band.
Could be. Speedwagon might have been up there.
You say Speedwagon and Styx are the only two that come to mind right away.
Yeah, Styx didn't really get as big as Boston though. But that's what's crazy is Styx had how many albums? Boston, they got huge after their first album. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was also where back then word of mouth was a much bigger thing, and you had
radio play.
Radio play was a big thing, and you had to put yourself out there. Like now you can just, like we're doing, throw it on the internet, hope somebody hears it, and hopefully enough people hear it.
Yeah. And if it's all about the views and the likes and the comments now, so if you don't get any of that, you're not going to even get picked up or heard, let alone get any kind of sales figures out of it. I mean, to me, the kind of musician I am, I'm not so concerned about the sales and whatnot. I'm just more concerned if people listen to what I have to put out there.
And what I liked about music back then is it was just so innocent. Everything was recorded live, and there was like no room for mistakes, where now you can record it one instrument at a time, one track at a time, one part at a time, cut, copy, paste. You know what I mean? It makes it so easy to make music sound good, where back then it might not sound like it with bands like Boston or other bands such as that, but you had to be an outstanding musician, like amazing musician, to put out an album to get that big for your debut album. That's amazing to me.
You'd almost have to be perfect. Like every track has to be laid down perfect.
Yeah, you can only cut tape so many times.
Yeah, I mean, and it's time consuming. It's expensive. You can do effects and things like that using tape that you can still do it digitally, but it's a lot more natural sounding analog. Yeah. Like we were talking earlier about the effect on the keyboard. There's a pitch bend in it in this album, and this is long before Pro Tools. I doubt that there was the availability for a pitch bend slider on the keyboards
could have been,
back then.
I don't know.
But
I'm sure there was.
Right. But he did document that the way he got that bend was he literally put his finger on the tape in order to bend the note up. So, I mean, I think stuff like that's just awesome. I used to hear it from people, especially older musicians, older music fans and whatnot. Oh, yeah, the older records sound better and all this. Really, to me, I'm not going to say I agree or disagree, because to me, it all sounds good.
It's just a totally different feeling thing. Like, music is music.
Yeah.
And everybody takes what they will from it. That a lot of the music I listen to, like older people are like, that's just screaming, that's just noise. It's like, okay, but I could say the same thing about your music, and the only reason that I have that opinion or you have your opinion is because it's not what you are used to listening to.
Right. Because what they found is screeching or hollering or, abrasive to them. Imagine what their parents thought of when they would bring this kind of stuff home. You have some guy wailing, several octaves above what he should.
Exactly. And I'm sure that somebody was like, oh, all he's doing is just screaming.
Yeah.
And how many people we keep talking about Rush, but I just can't help it.
Well, any of those bands
how
in
many
the 70s,
people gave Rush a bunch of shit because of Geddy Lee's voice?
Exactly. Or Robert Plant or Brad Delp, or let's go with Rob Halford back when he started. I mean, just insane.
But then, like, it's interesting how Rush got a bunch of shit for Geddy Lee's voice, but then, like, Coheed and Cambria came out, and many would argue he sounds a lot like Geddy Lee, and people don't even like think twice about it. It's like, he sounds just like Geddy Lee. How come he's not getting a bunch of shit now?
Well, to be fair,
but I think it's because people have grown to accept Rush for that.
And to be fair, Claudio and Coheed, they came out at least 30 or 40 years after the fact, so they've had some time to kind of process that's a style of singing. But I don't know, like, as far as all that goes, like I mentioned in the last video, the production, I'm really finding the value in that because, I've heard some songs where the production quality isn't so great on other artists and other bands. But then you hear something like this, and you can hear a big difference. I mean, just the ability to hear each different instrument and the overall mix. I think, for me anyway, aside from this is more along the style in which I play, but I think also just production quality, it's going to make this album a lot easier for me to work on than the last one.
Yeah.
Like, despite what the guitar techniques he's using or anything, just the fact that I can hear it, I think that's going to make it a lot easier.
Yeah. Well, that was our listen to Boston's first album. I guess throughout the week we're gonna learn a song. I think I'm gonna learn Rock and Roll Band,
and I'm probably just gonna go ahead to take More Than a Feeling because I mean, we were talking about this earlier.
Might as well pick their huge songs because like they all sound pretty much the same.
Yep. And again, just from listening to this a few times, and by a few I mean a lot, since I was little, I just kind of already know the feel of More Than a Feeling and kind of how to come to grips with it. So, and I think these are two great examples of what Boston has to offer, All
right. So thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you in the next one.
All right. Peace.